My name is Margaret, and I'm a 32-year-old who believed she had the perfect family. My husband, Gerald, and I had been married for 12 years, and our 11-year-old son, Bobby, was the center of our world. Every Sunday we'd have dinner with my mom, Linda, and Gerald would always go early to help her. He was a doting son-in-law, always fixing things and looking out for her. This particular Sunday began like any other, but what I uncovered that day would completely shatter my perception of the people I loved most. Before I share what happened, let me know where you're watching from, hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. Life in our modest two-story Denver home had always felt like a blessing. Gerald's steady income as a construction manager allowed me to work part-time as an accountant and still be there for Bobby. Our house had a small garden where Gerald would teach Bobby how to throw a baseball on weekends, and their laughter would float through the kitchen as I made pancakes. My mother, Linda, 58, had been living alone for 5 years since my father's sudden heart attack. She was still independent, but Gerald had naturally taken on the role of the son she never had. He'd check on her plumbing during the week, fix leaky faucets, or just sit with her for coffee. I was so thankful to have a husband who valued family, especially since my mom was my closest confidant. Our Sunday ritual was sacred. Gerald would arrive around 10 a.m. to help her with dinner, and she'd make his favorite pot roast. Bobby and I would join them around noon, spending the afternoon playing board games or watching old movies. These gatherings were the cornerstone of our happiness, the constant that grounded our busy lives. Gerald was a man who remembered birthdays, brought my mom flowers on Mother's Day, and listened to her childhood stories for hours. He made everyone feel heard and valued. Bobby looked up to his dad, constantly talking about how strong and smart he was. Our neighbors often commented on how lucky I was to have such a devoted husband. There was never a reason to doubt our marriage or his loyalty. He was consistent, reliable, and affectionate, bringing me coffee in bed, kissing me goodbye, and calling on his lunch breaks. When I had the flu, he took time off to care for both me and Bobby. This was the man I had built my life around, the person I trusted completely. My bond with my mother had only deepened since my father's death. She leaned on me for emotional support but maintained her independence. Watching Gerald help her with tasks my father used to handle filled me with gratitude. I often told friends how blessed I was to have a husband who treated my mother like his own family. Bobby was thriving in this loving environment, excelling in school and baseball. Our family felt unbreakable. Every night, tucking Bobby into bed, I felt a deep sense of contentment. My trust in Gerald was absolute. We shared everything from daily frustrations to long-term dreams about Bobby's future and family vacations. He would often joke about being the luckiest man alive, and I believed him. The thought that he could be hiding something that would destroy our family never once crossed my mind. That Sunday morning began just like all the others. I woke to the smell of coffee and found Gerald at the kitchen table, scrolling on his phone in his worn jeans and flannel shirt. Bobby was still asleep, and the house was peacefully quiet. "Morning, beautiful," he said, looking up with the smile that had won me over 14 years ago. "I made your coffee just the way you like it." He gestured to my mug, perfectly prepared with the right amount of cream. "You're up early for a Sunday," I said, settling across from him. "Planning to get to Mom's before the roosters wake up?" I was teasing, but it was true. He had been arriving at her house earlier and earlier lately. He put his phone down and looked at me with an unreadable expression. "Actually, honey, I need to take care of some work stuff first. Why don't you and Bobby go ahead? And I'll meet you there later, probably around 1 or 2. This was highly unusual. Gerald never missed the morning preparation with my mom. "Work stuff on a Sunday?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite my confusion. "Is everything okay with the Morrison project?" "Nothing serious," he reassured me, squeezing my hand. "Just some paperwork for tomorrow's meeting. You know how it is." His explanation was plausible, but something about his demeanor felt off. An hour later, Bobby and I were in my Honda, driving the familiar 30-minute route. Bobby chattered excitedly about a new video game he wanted to show his grandma, oblivious to the unease growing in me. "Mom, do you think Dad will help me practice batting when we get home?" he asked. "Coach says I need to work on my swing." "I'm sure he will, sweetheart," I replied. This was true. Gerald spent an hour every evening helping Bobby with his baseball swing. As we neared my mother's neighborhood, my usual anticipation turned to confusion and then concern. Parked in front of her house was Gerald's unmistakable blue Ford F-150 truck, with a familiar dent on the passenger side. "Dad's already here," Bobby exclaimed. "But didn't he say he'd come later?" "Maybe he finished his work early," Bobby suggested, but a cold knot formed in my stomach. Gerald had been very specific. Why was his truck here now? I pulled over and told Bobby I wanted to surprise his dad. In reality, I needed a moment to process what I was seeing. He had never lied about his whereabouts before. "Stay here for a minute, sweetie," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mommy wants to surprise Dad and Grandma. I'll be right back." Bobby happily reached for his gaming device. I walked slowly toward the house, taking the long way around to the backyard. I wasn't sure why I was being so cautious, but my gut told me to proceed carefully. The house was eerily quiet. Usually I'd hear the radio, pots and pans, and laughter. But today there was a strange stillness. All the curtains were drawn, which was also unusual for my mother. As I got closer, I heard faint voices from inside. They were too muffled to make out words, but the tone seemed serious and hushed. I positioned myself near the kitchen window, but the voices were coming from the living room, the last place they'd be during dinner prep. My heart pounded faster. Maybe my mother had another guest, or maybe they were planning a surprise for Bobby. But the dread in my stomach continued to grow. I crept closer to the living room window, staying low behind a cluster of rose bushes. From here, I could hear the conversation more clearly. It was not the casual chat I expected. The voices were intimate, hushed, and filled with an emotional intensity one had never heard in their interactions before. Gerald's voice had a tenderness he only used with me. My mother's voice had a vulnerability that seemed far too personal for a conversation with her son-in-law. I pressed my ear to the window, my hands trembling. Every instinct told me I was about to discover something that would change everything, but I couldn't stop myself from listening. The conversation continued, and gradually, individual words began to cut through my disbelief. Words that would shatter my understanding of my marriage and my family. "Linda, we can't keep doing this." Gerald's voice was clear, heavy with emotion. "It's been 3 years. 3 years of lying to Margaret. 3 years of pretending this is just friendship when we both know it's so much more than that." My mother's response made my knees buckle. "I know, Gerald, but I can't help how I feel about you. After my husband died, I thought I'd never feel alive again. But you make me feel like a woman again instead of just a lonely widow." 3 years. The affair had started just months after my father's funeral. All the times I had praised Gerald for being a caring son-in-law, he had been betraying me. "Margaret suspects nothing," Gerald continued. "She trusts us both completely. She thanks me for spending time with you." "Sometimes I feel so guilty," my mother replied, her voice thick with tears. "When she talks about how much she loves you, I want to disappear into the ground. But then you touch me or you look at me, and I forget everything else." I covered my mouth to stifle a cry. My husband was unfaithful, and his partner was my own mother. The woman who had raised me and advised me on marriage had been sleeping with him for 3 years. They talked about secret phone calls and clandestine meetings, using my schedule as cover. "We need to make a decision," Gerald said finally. "It's not fair to Margaret. It's not fair to Bobby, and it's killing me inside. Either we tell her the truth and deal with the consequences, or we end this." "How can we tell her?" my mother sobbed. "It will destroy her. She'll lose her husband and her mother in one moment." I had heard enough. My legs were shaking and my vision blurred with tears. The 2 people I trusted most in the world had been systematically deceiving me. But even in my devastation, I had to stay in control. Bobby was waiting in the car, completely innocent. I couldn't let him see me fall apart. I forced myself to move away from the window. Every step back to the car felt like walking through quicksand. My mind was reeling, trying to process the betrayal while maintaining composure. Bobby looked up from his game, his face bright. "Did you surprise them, Mom? Are we going in now?" "Actually, sweetie," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "Dad and Grandma are busy with something right now. We should come back later. Maybe we can go get some ice cream first." I was buying time. "But I'm hungry now," Bobby protested. "And I wanted to show Grandma my new baseball cards." "You can show her later," I promised, starting the car. The lies were flowing so easily, and I realized with horror that I was already becoming a person I didn't recognize. The drive home was a blur. I kept the radio on, forcing myself to respond to Bobby's chatter while my mind raced. 3 years of deception. 3 years of Gerald coming home to me after being with my mother. 3 years of family dinners built on lies. Once home, I sent Bobby to his room to play video games. I needed to think, to plan. I sat at the same kitchen table where Gerald had smiled at me just hours earlier and tried to make sense of the timeline. My father had died 3 years ago. Gerald had started spending more time with my mother then, and I had been so grateful for his support. Now I understood that while I was grieving and juggling responsibilities, my husband and mother were falling in love. They had used my trust as cover for their betrayal. I started seeing things differently. Gerald's phone buzzing with quickly deleted texts. My mother's questions about his work schedule, which I now realized were calculating. The secret glances they shared during family dinners. Gerald's subtle shifts in behavior, less affection, more distraction, which I had attributed to stress, now made sense as his emotional and physical energy being directed elsewhere. The anger began to burn through the shock. How dare they? How dare they use my love and trust against me? I realized I couldn't confront them immediately. I needed evidence. I needed to protect Bobby's interests and my financial security. I needed to be strategic, not just emotional. They had 3 years to plan their lies. I needed to level the playing field. That afternoon, I began developing a plan that felt both surreal and necessary. The trusting wife I had been that morning no longer existed. In her place was someone forged by betrayal, guided by cold, clear thinking. First, I needed concrete evidence. I checked my phone's recording and camera capabilities. I knew their schedules well enough to predict when they'd be together. While Bobby was occupied, I called Gerald. He answered with a guilty tone. "Hey honey, how did things go at your mom's house? I'm heading over soon." "Actually," I said, keeping my voice casual, "Mom wasn't feeling well. We decided to postpone dinner until next Sunday. Why don't you just come home?" There was a long pause. "Oh," he said, sounding disappointed. "Maybe I should stop by and check on her anyway." "She's planning to rest all afternoon," I replied smoothly. "I think it's better if we just let her sleep." "Okay," he agreed, still sounding uncertain. "I guess I'll just finish up here and come home." I felt a strange sense of power. For the first time, I was the one with information, controlling the situation. 30 minutes later, I called my mother's house. She answered immediately, as if waiting for a call from Gerald. "Hi, Mom," I said, injecting concern into my voice. "How are you feeling? You seemed a little under the weather earlier." "Under the weather?" she repeated, confused. "Yes, when we came by around noon. We didn't want you to get us sick." I was testing her, seeing how quickly she could adapt. "Oh yes," she said, recovering. "I think I'm fighting off a little bug. It's probably better you and Bobby didn't stay." I told her Gerald was going to stop by, but I told him she needed rest. "That's very thoughtful of you," she replied, and I heard the relief in her voice. My small deception had accomplished several things. It separated them, gave me information about their ability to coordinate lies, and provided me with time to prepare for a confrontation. I spent the afternoon researching divorce laws, gathering financial documents, and making copies of important papers. I was preparing for a war, even though I hoped it wouldn't come to that. That evening, Gerald came home with takeout from Bobby's favorite Chinese restaurant, acting like the loving husband he had always been. We talked about Bobby's baseball game and made plans for the weekend. He was so convincing that if I hadn't overheard his conversation, I would never have suspected anything. But I had. The man sitting across from me was a stranger, a liar. The knowledge I held felt like a poison, changing me with every passing hour. I was becoming calculating and suspicious. This wasn't who I wanted to be, but it was who I needed to become to protect myself and my son. The next evening, a Tuesday, I knew Gerald would be at my mother's house after work. I called in sick, arranged for Bobby to have dinner at his friend Michael's, and prepared for the most difficult confrontation of my life. At 5:30 p.m., I drove past my mother's house and saw Gerald's truck. This time my phone's recording app was on. The naive woman I had been 3 days ago no longer existed. In her place was someone determined to document their betrayal. I approached the house from the backyard, moving quietly in the shadows. The sun was setting, providing perfect cover.